I think I have found the folks who can navigate change successfully both have the understanding of why change is happening, what is changing. So they already are curious and they're proactive, have this growth mindset to learn. Meanwhile, they are those that tend to have the we can do this. I'm sure there's light at the end of the tunnel mentality versus the sort of victim mentality. Why are they doing this change? They're out there to get us. I've seen this just successful over and over again. And obviously, I myself have been almost an archetype of not only dealing with change, but almost jumping on changes and almost doing sort of a corporate life, a corporate surfer.
You are listening to Power Marketing with Kevin Lee. Kevin and his agency Did It have helped thousands of businesses win through superior marketing, as have his books, articles, speaking engagements, and the E-Marketing Association Power Marketing podcasts. Here's Kevin.
Hi, I'm Kevin Lee with the E-Marketing Association. I run a bunch of other businesses as well as a nonprofit, two nonprofits, I guess, both Giving Forward and the E-Marketing Foundation. Covering an interesting new topic here on the E-Marketing Association podcast today with really the value of coaching for executives, particularly marketing executives, but it really applies to any executives. So this was a brainchild actually of Carolyn Bao, who is one of our guests, and Marisa Sarfatti, who is her executive coach. So you can obviously visit their LinkedIn bios. We'll have links below when we post this. But Marisa Sarfatti is an executive coach that helps executives, with focusing in on the areas that are most important to them and to their businesses, which is a win-win for the business that employs the individual and for the individual executive themselves. Carolyn, I've intersected with for many years, most recently in AppsFlyer, but she's now most recently CMO of Edge. So I'll let you do additional self-introductions if you like, but we can jump right in as well. Marisa, we'll start with a question about executives and coaching. Sort of like therapy, some folks think there's a stigma associated with coaching, and so executives might be reluctant to ask for help. So how should they shift this mindset and sort of be open to coaching?
Right. Kevin, firstly, thank you so much for having us both on EMA, and it's great to connect with you, and all the work that you do is spectacular. And we're very excited about this podcast together with Caroline. I think one of the biggest things that I've seen over the 23 years that I've been doing executive global leadership coaching is that the good leaders are not afraid of coaching. In fact, they go towards it. And I have to say that it's often they don't like it. It's not comfortable to be put outside of your comfort zone. And Carolyn can attest to the fact that my style of coaching, particularly, I believe in this, power of the paradox, radical candor, because no one else is telling the executive leadership what they need to hear, in a very direct way, right, Carolyn? They're all skirting around it. So you need someone who's going to be really direct and hold you accountable in a way that your team might, or your colleagues and peers might, sometimes not even your CEO, if you're VP marketing or CMO. And then also with a lot of love. I want to see my clients win. I want to see them be the best that they can be. And I think there are three mindset shifts that you can really apply when you're going towards the coaching process as an executive leader. The first is that you're not changing, you're evolving to the best next level of you. And I often get leaders who say, this has worked for me and I've got a lot of success doing this and I don't want you to change me. But essentially what you're doing is just hitting the refresh, Kevin, and you're removing what I call the sell by date behaviors, the ones that have gone, that aren't serving you anymore. And you're building on your success of what you already use, which is really imperative. And that leads me to my second point about framing it is, Kevin, in the 23 years that I've been working with multiple companies, from big size companies like HP and Amdocs, which is 30,000, and Nice and AppsFlyer and Move It. Um, I have seen the complexity in the last 3, 4 years increase tenfold, and the pace at which the change is happening and the disruption. So you really need that outside lens to give you also what's happening in the ecosystem. So when I'm coaching, like many other coaches that are top in their area, we're bringing trends and patterns that we're seeing in other companies with other leaders, and that's a really good mirror for any leader. And then I think lastly, which is super important, is I think that in order to reframe how you look at coaching, you also have to look at it like a gym workout. And I call it the grit and growth mindset. So it's got to be about grit as well as growth. And what you're doing as a leader is you're building your resilience muscle, because leadership is tough. There are a lot of failures, there are a lot of frustrations, there are a lot of highs, but there are a lot of lows, and you've got to build that muscle, and a coach is great to sharpen that grit and growth mindset toolbox.
That's great. Thanks, Marisa. Carolyn, so you've been the beneficiary of coaching, and some folks who are, have perhaps their corporation either helping subsidize the coaching or are introduced to coaches as a result of a particular organization's HR department or a general willingness to underwrite the coaching. I'd love to hear how you thought about the difference between sort of the self-help option, which of course does not provide that perspective, where you're just sort of hopefully self-aware, versus, how coaching played a role in your career and having that third-party perspective was quite different than what you would have accomplished on your own.
Yeah, absolutely. I recall over the years when I was every time I had a significant role change, I was fortunate to have received coaching. I recall earlier when I was stepping into director role, we had an executive coach at the director and above level. And later on, I remember taking on the first ever VP role. In fact, I really believed in coaching enough. I actually shell out my own money to hire a coach, specifically leaning into the area where I needed help. And very fortunate to have also worked with Marissa as part of that AppsFlyer senior leadership coaching arrangement. But I want to call out there are several things that I realized, and I am a huge advocate now for anyone who aspires to up level their professional trajectory is to always work with a strategic an executive coach, because there are three areas I've found coaches help me tremendously. One is when I realized work is just like another sport. To Marissa's analogy earlier about gym workout, I picked up running for years now, almost 10 years. And I realized whenever I'm filmed, the way how I run, and when I receive that feedback around the strides and the cadence, I became better and more intentional in the way how I would do my sport. But work, like our professional pursuit, is also just like a sport. It would be insane to think about you can up level your sports skills without a coach who helps you. I mean, no one in the world that has attained their championships and gold medals had done that without a coach. So that's one thing that I really have realized. It helps so much. It really cuts out the learning curve and the time, because our biggest resource and limited resource is time. The second piece I found that was super useful is oftentimes you'll hear people say, you know what to do. It's in you. Your coach is there to help you pull out what you already knew what to do. It's true and it's not exactly true, because with a bunch of reasons where we may have the intuition, we may have had the judgment, but it's super critical to have a sounding board, someone who has seen this maybe played out in other organizations where you can really run ideas by. And that's where even to this date, I would run ideas by Marissa and say, this is the situation. I did this. Was that right? And so that's the second piece. And the third piece that was very interesting is as you further grow in your career, you'll find that your peers become far few and between. There's oftentimes you are playing a very lonely sport, the only CMO in the whole company, or maybe one of the two VPs of marketing. So it's important to have a neutral third party who is not really intertwined or entangled in your company's politics, to be that sounding board for you and really help you to I think make your best judgment.
Those are great points. Marisa, you mentioned the pace of change is faster than ever before, and people are therefore sort of somewhat overwhelmed. And I've certainly spoken to executives, in sometimes in a pitch environment where people just don't even have time to think about making any changes to their agency or making any changes to their marketing plan or making any changes at all because they feel like they're in triage mode, right? There's some
Right.
fire that they're fighting and that barely gives them a time to think, right? So they're just being reactive, they're not being proactive. So,
Right.
what are some frameworks that you found are helpful for those executives that need to come up with a prioritization punch list or sort of break the firefighting triage
Mhm.
cycle that they're in?
So, Kevin, the triage firefighting mode goes across the board. Obviously, it's not only CMOs and VP marketing, it is every leader because you're executing and you're managing, but then you've got this component of leadership, which is really about looking at the big picture and the long term. And that's exactly what gets impacted, Kevin, as you said. You barely have time to update your plan because you just go. So I love the quote from Bill Gates that being busy is not a proxy of your leadership. And I love that frame because we think often as leaders that our calendar needs to be jam packed. And that shows that we're working, that we're giving value. But I always look at the 2% high impact that you can bring. And there are three things here in the triage and the firefighting that I find the most common is that firstly, leaders are not taking think time. They're not doing it as their job. Chunking out on a Friday, I normally say Friday morning for the week ahead, once a month, look at the long term month, right? And really put in 1 or 2 hours. Now, if you can't, do 45 minutes. Or every day, do 15 minutes at the end of the week, try to extend it to 30, 45 minutes. Because essentially, what you start to do is you start to see that you filled your time with white noise a lot of the time and being helpful, which is really not moving the needle and creating the impact. So the first thing that I say to my leaders is really carve out that think time. And then when you are prioritizing, it's easy to want to do quick wins, right? Dousing the fire. But I say look for the root of the fire. Don't just put out all the fires. And often when you think on it, you'll see that there's 1 or 2 areas that are consistently causing the fire. That's why it's a fire. That's why it's a pain point for people, right? So, really, when you are prioritizing, I always say quick wins, midterm, and long term. Now, this long term is really the second thing scale up. This is something that leaders, they say, yes, I'm too busy. I'll do it later. You never do it later. And what happens is the crunch ends up happening, right? So you have to be looking ahead of the curve for some of it. And a lot of the time, I find my leaders are not scaling the next tier down. They're not scaling their capabilities and their capacities. And that's really, really essential. So, when you're doing that think time, you have to be clear that it's for the medium and the long term, scale the capabilities, and be intentional and clear. This is one of the things that's amazing. A lot of leaders are not clear on their decisions. I always say there's 4 parts to it. The what you do is just the top. Why you doing it, how you doing it, and with whom, and sometimes where you're doing it and when. right? It's all the W's. So when you're looking at what is my priority, really ask, why is this my priority? Is it to keep the customer quiet, or is it actually to solve the big picture problem and to not only solve a problem, but to innovate? Right. And I'll give you a great example. I worked with an amazing ICOM leader in Amdocs. It's been a 2.5 year journey with her leadership team, one-on-one coaching, teamwork, broader teamwork that we've done, especially around, giving sessions on the nature of change and how to navigate change and disruption. And she went from being with her team to being a help desk, literally correcting PowerPoint and spelling and graphics, to now launching an employee marketing strategy, which means that the HR, all of the units have to go into her unit to send out a clear message to the employees: which month is career growth month, which month is about performance review. So that the biggest thing we see is employees are overwhelmed by all the marketing, the internal marketing, the messaging. So just to create that alignment, that clarity. So you can't do that if you're firefighting. So you've got to, in a way, be bold, and that's the grit and growth mindset, Kevin. You also have to be quite brave to push back and to hold people back and say, wait, we're doing something that in the long run is really going to have a great impact. It's going to be innovative. It's going to change your business or change the landscape.
That's great, and it sounds like essentially what you're advocating is that with coaching, the leaders can shift from a reactive mindset into a proactive mindset. And so I'd love your perspective on that. And then Carolyn, you can jump in and talk about how, perhaps you've been able to do that in the current fast-paced industries that you've been in, because your last several roles have all been, super fast-paced.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Marissa, as well, to share that. I think to your point, oftentimes one of the biggest, I think the biggest scarcity for senior leaders is that attention. There are just so many things pulling us. It is easy to be in firefighter mode at all times. And it ranges not only from the daily operations, but also oftentimes employee mental health. The, I've had a project that was really big, and as we were trying to program the project, there were a couple of employees that started to call in sick, and they requested mental health day, for example. So what I have found that was super useful is not only that I need to have a system to prioritize my own work so that I have time for deep thinking, but I need to have, and something Marissa knows that she saw sort of my own growth as well, to give my direct reports a good sense of clarity. Where should they focus? What are the things that are ideas that they can park and think about to come back with more ideas and plans in the future? So the clarity to give my team is critical. But meanwhile, I also have found teaching my team on how to prioritize actually tremendously help me in the long run, because they then deliver against the commitments that us as a team need to deliver. The last piece on that prioritization that's super important is how to have a clear methodology and articulation on why I'm prioritizing my team's deliverable so that I can upward manage and earn the very important space and the expectations that will set my team up for success. Otherwise, management may want 10 things done next month. Is that realistic? Sometimes that's not.
Yeah, I know there's well, one thing that we live and breathe in marketing, which is the power curve or the Pareto effect with 80/20 rule. And it's interesting how people often don't end up applying it to their own to-do lists. They only apply it to marketing data sets. And I'd love to get your thoughts on that. And obviously, there are variations of, I think that they call it the Eisenhower matrix or something along those lines,
Yeah,
with the idea of prioritizing via a grid and how that those kinds of things can be useful.
for sure. Yeah, the Eisenhower grid, I think as classic as it is still the easiest, is it urgent and important? If yes, let's do it. Otherwise, there are a bunch of other ways of pundit, delegate, for sure. That's been very useful.
So let's see the anything else that you want to add, Marisa, to
So,
this
so
topic?
just you mentioned not using the data. And I think that that is such an interesting point to raise, just apropos of when you are lobbying as a leader. And it's so interesting because when I work with marketing leaders, I always imagine that they understand how to market themselves within the company and lobby and present, data and narratives for cooperation and collaboration. But often I find that not only marketing, but other leaders don't necessarily use the data for new ideas. And it's a really interesting thing because, I'm working a lot with data companies and they're measuring their sales with the data, but they're not necessarily measuring how they're working or what the impact is of how they executed something versus if they tweaked it, right? So I also, I'm a big framer. Carolyn can tell you that we've had a few conversations where I've told her to list the data points and why that data is so significant in terms of positioning herself so she can get the buy-in for her ideas, whether it's, with executives or with her team or with stakeholders. I often find that's always amusing to me, especially in marketing, that often the marketing leaders don't have a marketing plan for themselves and their own team. They're not necessarily mapping influences within the company, targeting them. But really, that's a huge part of executive leadership is building those alliances and positioning the value that you are bringing connected to data.
That's great. Thanks so much. A lot of folks would probably agree that the disruption is coming from a lot of directions at the moment. Obviously, there's AI, which is the elephant in the room on the area of disruption, but you also have geopolitical disruption. You've got potential new entrants into an industry category and the shifting competitive landscape for a particular brand or company. So all of these things, these areas of disruption, are a challenge for executives. So, for the executives who are having to lead through the disruption, are there any predictors that predict either success or failure for those executives?
For me, Kevin, I think it's about whether you are really immersing yourself in the current understanding of AI and how it impacts your area, number one, but also the whole area of the business. And I think this is something I'm seeing in leadership is that we're going more and more towards not roles that are box roles and definitions. This is my territory. This is your territory. For example, I had a leader in marketing propose a new AI sales tool for the sales team to be much more efficient and effective, following up on leads, closing the deal in the cycle, measuring. Um, and I would say that I believe that the leaders today need to take off the blinkers and understand that they are leading the company strategy. They're not only leading their vertical. So I think that once we start to do that, we start to see that we're responsible for everything, which is a big thing. It's much bigger than it was before. It's not only your little territory, but I also think you're in it together. And the more you can foster and build those connected relationships, trust relationships, cooperation and collaboration, then you're going to help the company win and really move the strategy. And in terms of AI, it is super important to know what roles you have in your team that are actually going towards extinction. They are no longer relevant. And I think the leaders who are going to be ahead of the game are going to be able to see what I call the gray spaces, which are your blue sky and your opportunities, to reconfigure how the team works or a role, what can be automated so that you can level up your people to do something much more impactful, much more high value, and maybe a little out of their scope, right? Maybe it's not in their job title. But for me, I think the leaders that are going to, and I'm seeing it already, the leaders that are understanding how to harness AI rather than being territorial and going, I don't want AI to touch the way my team functions. Those are the leaders that are already successful. They're already more successful than their colleagues.
That's great. Carolyn, I'd love to get your perspective on that, both as it relates to AI, but transformation in general, including perhaps a point of view on when innovation from a particular title bridges over into an adjacent title, so CMO, CRO, for example, how to navigate the politics there to make sure everybody feels like they're a winner or a hero coming out of that.
Yeah, those are some big topics. I want to double down on what Marissa covered in terms of the AI. Frankly, I have seen not only AI-driven changes, but maybe I live in Silicon Valley. Maybe this is sort of the air that we breathe. Majority of what we do, we started to have this mindset that change is the only constants. But not everybody deals with change positively. I think I have found the folks who can navigate change successfully both have the understanding of why change is happening, what is changing. So they already are curious and they're proactive, have this growth mindset to learn. Meanwhile, they are those that tend to have the we can do this. I'm sure there's light at the end of the tunnel mentality versus the sort of victim mentality. Why are they doing this change? They're out there to get us. I've seen this just successful over and over again. And obviously, I myself had been almost an archetype of not only dealing with change, but almost jumping on changes and almost doing sort of a corporate life, a corporate surfer. Wherever I see changes, I kind of get excited. I think that actually fueled my comfort level to take on roles where, for instance, in traditional sense would be, oh, maybe someone is not ready for that. I don't see that. I see possibilities. I see with focused learning and coaching, one doesn't have to have just one coach, right? I could have my finance coach, my CEO coach, my executive coach to really assemble a team of support and resource, but meanwhile commit to learn and commit to make sure that I internalize the knowledge that I have seen so that I deliver business impact. Something I really now coach my mentees to is to boil it down. Change is constant. Change is the only constants, but there are going to be folks who grow at a faster rate if they're committed to learn and they are committed to deliver business impact. So forget about performance review. Forget about getting a promotion. If we are deliberate in delivering business impact and help the organization to be a better one, the payoff is going to come within this organization or within another organization because the knowledge is now internalized.
Great,
And
thanks so much. Yeah,
if I, if
Marisa,
I
yeah,
if
go
I
ahead.
can just add on to what Carolyn said, firstly, Carolyn is a great example. As she said, she's way ahead of the curve. She's jumping on the change. I think if you can have the spirit of curiosity, and I think that one of the things that a coach can do, and even with Caroline, we've worked at what are some of the self-limiting beliefs, the fear of failure, the fear of going outside of your role. As you said, Kevin, how do you create a space where everyone feels like they're winning? Sometimes you can't always win, by the way, in leadership, and you've got to be able to develop the grit and resilience, right? To have that growth mindset of going, some days I'm going to win and some days someone else is, and some days we both can win. We all can win. But it's not one, it's not always one constant, right? And I do love what Carolyn says about the curiosity. If you can, as a leader, frame yourself through curiosity rather than trying things and maybe failing or going outside of the role and not being liked or stepping on toes. Those are all things, Kevin. I always coach body, mind, and soul. And the soul discussions are often the trigger discussions, right? What stops us? What are our fears? What holds us back? And we have to integrate that with how we're walking around day to day. Otherwise, that does influence and impact our decision making, definitely.
Great, thanks so much. We have time for a sort of a wrap up. So, what are some practical tips that each of you would give executives who want to improve their leadership? Um, Hopefully, coaching is one of them. That's sort of the obvious. But what are some tips that they can maybe do on their own, and tips of things they can do alongside with a coach?
I think what I have learned and I really want to encourage is first, invest in yourself. Either this is paid by the company or not, is to sign up the courses that you want to learn. Hire a coach where you know that you want to improve, because with focused investment, this is probably way better than any other kinds of investment that we do. Especially, as someone who shops for fun, or I invest, people put their money in other areas, but really investing in ourselves is the best investment. The second piece is uh, absolutely remain curious and know that the journey of work is only parts of our experience in life. So I think I have found once I put work almost side by side with the rest of life, I almost demystify the need for who I am, the sort of identity, the fear of if I hire a coach or if I work with someone, if I ask for help. Ultimately, this is a sport we choose to do, have some fun, and knowing that if we're committed to do it well, we could ask for help and get better ultimately. The last piece I would say for the modern day leaders is many things in life may feel overwhelming, but using data, it has worked for me at least. Ultimately, a lot of the hazy decisions that we seem to be faced with boils down to obviously knowing yourself, but knowing yourself and know how to calculate and quantify risk versus reward. And that's where data becomes super critical, because data in this sense is not just the numbers, but also the insights, the knowing how to really size up the risk and the reward. So when we make any choice, or many executives, we make so many big decisions, we'll just feel a lot more assured. And that's like the three things that I have found is a huge change from who I am, for instance, 10 years ago. And I just wish to share this with the audience.
Yeah, that's great. One quick follow-up question before we go back to Marisa. You mentioned that you could potentially have different coaches for different purposes, just as an athlete might have a different coach for different elements of their game. And so, you might have a finance coach and an executive coach. And of course, there are also organizations that provide sort of peer-to-peer coaching, where you join a group and they become sort of bonded together and you receive peer-to-peer coaching, but that's sort of clearly not professional. So for those folks who are sort of deciding, okay, I now want to invest in myself, how would you recommend they go through the process of determining which types of coaches they should engage with, and whether or not they should go with a sort of general purpose executive coach, or focus on perhaps an area that they feel is a weak point for them and find a specialist coach instead, or
Yeah.
combination of all the above?
Yeah, excellent, excellent question because sometimes when you have too many voices in the exact same time frame, it can it can become confusing for yourself. Um, I reflect on my journeys. I think usually all at all times, one of the first things that was super important to do, to Marissa's point too, right, is about knowing yourself. And this is an exercise, frankly, we could do once a year. Every year we should take inventory around who am I, what do I want to accomplish, and what are the areas that I'm committing to work on this year. And that will change. Maybe last year I wasn't that strong in finance. Then I need to do that. But this year I feel like I really want to hone in around, for instance, executive level of influence. That annual planning helps you to decide where you want to double down on influence. The second piece that's interesting is depending on your life journey. The very specific time where I hired a coach whose prior experience was a CFO is because I was taking on this new VP of marketing role, and I knew that I had to, switch from managing a budget of few hundred thousands to several dozens of millions. And to succeed, as I build my own marketing strategy as a new leader, I wanted to vet it with someone who had that CFO perspective. So those are some of the ideas that I want to suggest.
Great. Thanks for sharing that additional insight. Marisa, any thoughts on the same topic?
So I would say, obviously, there's so many points, but if I'm going to say three of them, I would say really spend time in understanding your style of leadership. And I work a lot on this with each leader because some leaders are extroverted, some are introverted, some are creative and big picture. Others are really, as one of my CROs said, he said, I make the trains run on time, right? So really understand what is your strength, what do you bring, and then as Carolyn said, what is your next level up? What can you add to the toolbox? I'm not a great believer in only focusing on your strength because I've seen in my experience that people who do that and don't build up the areas that are gaps or weaknesses, inevitably those weaknesses actually sabotage the strengths, right? So you can just have someone with great ideas. Often in marketing, I find my leaders are very creative and they're always on their feet thinking about ideas. They're not great with pulling it down, being consistent, repeating things because they get bored. They like newness. So, those kinds of things can end up sabotaging your strength. And I always say that about strengthening your gap areas, you don't have to be as strong as your strengths, but you have to just be strong enough or enough that it doesn't harm your strength, right? And so that's what I work on. I use something called the Lumina Profile tool, which actually gives you the data in percentages, whether you're 12% or 82%. So it can actually show you, where you are. I think the next thing really, Kevin, is clarity. Your job as a leader is clarity and decision making. And often leaders don't spend enough time sharpening their ideas and working them through, workshopping them. And they've been sitting having this idea for a few weeks and suddenly they spring it out and they expect that everyone's going to understand how they got to that conclusion. It doesn't work like that. You have to break it down. It's what I call Hansel and Gretel, like breadcrumbing it for people, right? Because they don't live in your head. So I think really making your vision and your pictures and your strategy and your actions even clear and then being decisive. The speed of decision making today is very important. A lot of leaders get jammed and they get almost frozen deer in the headlights with decision making. So I think that's a really important thing, clarity and speed of decision making. And I'd say the third thing is I love what Carolyn says, invest in yourself. You can't go wrong. You're your best investment. And I would say take that down to your team. As a leader, invest in developing your team. I have seen countless executives that I work with reclaim literally up to 2 days a week in time, not doing what I call the housework, but focusing on the high value. So I always say, as a leader, you've got to be focused on high value versus housework. And sometimes your housework is someone else's high value. So really level up your team, stretch them. It will only help how efficient and how capable you are of developing much more complex, innovative strategies and executing and delivering them in a high impact way.
Great insights. Thanks, both of you, for sharing that. I think a key takeaway for me is sort of the word investment, right? Because when we live in the world of marketing, we're often applying things like ROI against every marketing investment, whether it's top of the funnel branding and awareness down to the bottom of the funnel direct response. Everybody wants to know what's the ROI. And I think what you guys have made clear is that investing in yourself through self-improvement, preferably perhaps with a coach or at least somewhat even on your own, is a great ROI, right? So plus it manifests itself into ROI for the company, which I think is a key takeaway as well, which is not all companies are willing to subsidize or underwrite executive coaching for senior executives. And I think that's probably a mistake, right? Because as the executive grows, so do both the top and bottom line along with it, right? And I think that's a key takeaway that folks should have at both the personal and corporate level from this discussion.
You summarized it so well.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Kevin. This is
thanks for joining me. This has been a great conversation.
Absolutely. Next time we need to have a conversation about cod versus sea bass.
Absolutely.
Kevin Lee's Power Marketing is available on all your favorite podcast networks. Kevin loves helping businesses excel at marketing. Having marketing challenges? Just like Santa in The Miracle on 34th Street, if Kevin can't help you, he'll know someone who can. Find him on LinkedIn, subscribe, or follow.